Hello and welcome to the Common Sense Gospel. We have today with us, or I have with us, John Evans, and he is here because our congregation has asked John to preach for us on the topic of one another, which is our theme for this entire year. And he has also agreed to sit down with me for a few minutes on this Saturday afternoon and talk a little bit about many of the things that are going on with him and in the work that he is doing. I know you're involved in so much good work currently, certainly with the congregation where you are. But we have you here for these 2 days, and we're excited about that first and foremost. And I wanted to share something with you, John, as we start that was very special to me. That today is June 22nd, 2024, and today is the 21st anniversary of my baptism.
Wow. You know, I remember that day very well. Robin and I, my wife, we were talking about that, and I remember that Karen was expecting Corey at that time. And so if you want to know how long Danny and Karen have been Christians, just look at Corey, and you'll be able to tell. And I remember that Danny was much more nervous than Karen was upon being baptized. But I will say that that was one of the 5 best days of my life.
Oh.
In having the privilege of baptizing y'all, and you've been a joy to me ever since.
Oh, well, I really appreciate
and
that.
I mean that just as sincerely as I can possibly say it. What a joy and encouragement you've been to me. The older I get, the more I appreciate my friends.
Yes, sir. I hear that loud and clear, and obviously that goes both ways. Karen and I can't say enough about what you mean to us. Really, the example that you and Robin set for us as a married couple, raising boys. Your boys were older than ours, and so we're trying to establish this godly pattern as we see it in Scripture, looking for examples around us. All of that served us so well, and obviously the friendship that we've enjoyed has been very special and precious to us. And that's why, as we begin today, it really is very important to me to have you here and to allow others to get to know you in a small way, in the way that I was able to do. And, you know, the things I've learned and taken from you are too many to be counted. I mean, I'm even thinking about, you taught me to type. Do you know that?
I do know that. I well remember the story I had in mind when we started our training program that, Danny needed to learn how to write an article, 500 words, double spaced. I gave him the assignment, had a good topic for him, explained to him exactly what I wanted, went through all of that. I was real proud of myself for getting that lined out. And I remember, Danny, that you looked at me and you said, well, there's only one problem with your plan, John. And I said, what is that? He said, I don't know how to type.
That's right. Chicken pecking is what we call it.
And I thought, well, how do you make it through school and not know how to type? Well, you came in after typing was a thing and before keyboarding was a thing, and you'd kind of slipped in there when they didn't do that. And so we had, I remember we had to retool back up, and I found a Bible-based typing program, as I recall.
That's right.
And it wasn't long before you started typing, and that just shows the importance of having a training program that is tailor-made for the individual. It's not one size fits all. And in Danny's case, it was learning to type.
That's right. And that wasn't I sat down and I did it. And I'm thankful to this day, every time I type the name Jesus, that's the name I can type faster than any other name. Because in that lesson book, it's like J, 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 J. You do this with this finger only 1,000 times and then do J-E.
Yeah.
And then find that S. And so, that, but that again, that's just one of those little bitty things out of all of it that was something for me that was a gift. Really, I had to do the work, but you set that before me, did the research to find the book. And so all of that kind of framed and molded who I am today, and I'm thankful for all of that. I do want to say too, just as far as introduction for Brother Evans, is that he's not currently preaching full time. I have that right? Mm-hmm. Not currently preaching full time, but he and his wife Robin attend at University Oaks Church of Christ in San Antonio, Texas, where they continue to be a valuable part of the good work that is going on there. You have held gospel meetings in several states. Not just Texas, probably most of them in Texas,
mm-hmm. Yes.
but several states through the years. John is still teaching classes and preaching from time to time when the opportunity arises. And that's not just at University Oaks. You've had opportunities in Kerrville, is that right, just recently?
Yes, and meetings in different areas. And so one of the advantages of stepping down from full-time, where you're not preaching every Sunday at the home congregation, is that it's freed us up to teach classes at other congregations. I've even had opportunities to hold classes for folks of different faiths, which has been exciting for me. That's an opportunity that a challenge, I'll say it that way, but a challenge in a good way. And I always ask myself, would Jesus say, no, I'm not going to speak to these folks? I can't see that. There may come a time when you have to draw the line.
Sure.
And I try never to compromise my own faith in the classes that I teach. I do my best to avoid that, but at least stepping back from full-time preaching has allowed me to pursue some other challenges that I think are better for me right now. And sometimes it's good for the congregation to hear somebody different. After they've heard 1,000 of my sermons, it's probably good for them to hear somebody else for a while.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, that's part of it. And so you taught school for 12 years, and I'm bringing that up because I believe that's one of the main reasons that your teaching and preaching style is ultimately what it's become, the teaching of school students and going through that process for 12 years.
Yeah.
That when you turn and begin to preach the gospel, that some of those things have kind of built in. I know these things work. Here's how I can really make a point stick and last throughout the week. You're trying to serve brethren when you do that. And so is there some truth to that?
Yeah, I think so. I was a public school teacher in Texas for 12 years, language arts, English, I guess we would say, but language arts is what they called it. And when I graduated from college, I graduated from what's now Texas State. It was Southwest Texas when I went there. But when I graduated from college, I had an English degree, but I didn't have a teaching certificate. When my wife and I started dating, I was doing some writing. Writing had been my concentration. I'd been in a writing program in college, and writing had been my concentration. But when I figured out that I wanted to marry Robin, I also figured out I needed a regular paycheck. And teaching was the only thing that came to my mind. I was making about half a living for myself, writing how to catch a fish, how to shoot a deer kind of articles for outdoor magazines. And I needed a regular paycheck. And so a Divine Independent School District, little old rural school district south of San Antonio, was kind enough to hire me on an emergency certificate. And I started teaching school at that time. And for me, it was a long, slow process. I tell people I kind of backed into preaching in a way because I didn't have it in my mind that I would ever be a full-time gospel preacher. Didn't think it was something I could do. I was mortified being up in front of folks. In fact, one of the first lessons I ever gave, I completely lost my voice. I don't mean kind of lost my voice, completely lost my voice in front of a group of people, and just promised myself I would never do that again. And so for me, I had to teach thousands of classes before I even thought that it was something that I might be able to do, something that I could do. And when Rob and I were first married, we worshiped with a little congregation down in Jourdanton, had on a good Sunday maybe 20 people attend. And there just wasn't anybody else to bring a lesson. If I didn't get up and bring a lesson, there wasn't going to be a lesson that day. And so just through sheer dint of practice, I guess you would say, just by doing it over and over again, and then during the week, teaching English classes to 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, it was a long, slow process. But maybe it's a little bit like the 220 hitter in baseball. He has to really think about it. He has to really study it. He has to really practice to even hit 220. And for me, that's kind of the way that it was. And so I really had to think about what I was doing. How do you make this clear? How do you make this stick? How can you present it in a way that people are going to remember? You're not trying to impress somebody. You're trying to win souls to Christ. And that's kind of how my mind works on it. And so it took years and years to do that. And then I was anxious to share it with you, Danny.
Yeah.
And, so that was exciting.
Yeah.
But again, I say all of that just to, for the listeners to know that you're capable of more than you think you are. If you had asked me when I was a youngster what I would do to quote, make a living, the last two things I would have said would be a preacher and a teacher. That wasn't on my radar screen at all. but you don't know how life is going to take you, where it's going to take you. Through God's providential good care, He allowed me to continue to work at it. And brethren were so patient. Dan Shipley, great friend of mine for years and years, he said, everybody likes to listen to a good preacher. Nobody likes to listen to him get good. And I just am thankful for long-suffering brethren who were willing to give me the chance and the opportunity.
Yeah, well, you're very humble, because all I saw was the polished and perfected John Evans.
Well, you're easy to please.
Oh, well, kind of like an elementary school, middle school kid, probably. And so that, since you mentioned some of that just now, I think for me, the 17 years ago, serving as a deacon, being asked to preach, and that I was horrified, just like you. I worked at a lighting store.
I remember you stacked boxes for a living, Danny.
Yes, I did, all the way to the ceiling, and I was good at that, and I was paid well for that as well. And this idea of why don't you bring a sermon in Woodlawn Hills at the time, we probably had 100 members or so. Yeah. So it's not just standing in front of 10 people and taking a shot at it. And as you said, it was very scary. You didn't say scary, but I was so nervous, because it's not just say these words to a group of people. It is, you're sharing the word of God in a way that can help not just your family or the members you've drawn close to, but every soul in the room. The 85-year-old brother who knows the Bible better than you do, the 15-year-old kid who was baptized last week, they both need something they can go home with and say, I can do this. And so how do you share that? And it just, my heart was stricken with fear, because I couldn't even imagine how that would be possible. And yet it is possible, because God's word is powerful.
Yeah, it's not you.
Right.
It is God's word that's making the impact.
Absolutely. And we learn to trust that and to lay it out the way we see that, especially in the New Testament, the way Paul presented it and the way these letters were written, and stick to the text, that there's much good can come from that. So, boy, you don't learn that on the first time you stand up, though.
Yeah, we imagine, or at least I believe it is a common thought, that you have to be a polished orator to be an effective teacher or preacher. We need somebody who's got a better command of the English language, who's more polished in what he says, who's skillful in that. And my experience tells me that's not really what is going to win people to the cross. Can you speak from the heart? Can you say it in a way, if you think about Jesus, who's the master teacher, he used common, everyday examples and illustrations to make his points. Think about the parables. Think about a farmer went out into the field to sow seed. There was a wedding banquet that was held. You just think about those common, everyday illustrations, something that the average person could understand and take with them. The greatest sermon ever preached is Sermon on the Mount. And it's not that those words aren't challenging. They're very challenging, but you can understand them. The challenge isn't in understanding the sermon. The challenge is living the sermon.
Right. That's exactly right. And the simplicity that's there, and yet unendingly deep for us, because it is set beside a spiritual truth that not just a person is sharing, but the Son of God who's come from heaven, from God, from the presence of God, to say, this is a spiritual truth, and I want you to take hold of it. And he does it in a very simple way. So everyone, as we were talking about, everyone in the room can say, oh, I get it. Seeds, when you put them in the ground, they grow. And so,
you
then
reap what you sow.
Exactly. There's so many lessons that are built and established in what God has already ordained in creation that we can look to and use to make those lessons land the way they should. So that's fantastic. And I just had one other thing for you, thinking about when we first started working together, and you were saying, I think I can help you if you'll allow me to share some thoughts, ideas. Really, the nuts and bolts of preaching is the kind of the best way I know to say it. You kind of pulled the veil back for me and say, here's what preaching looks like that no one sees. So that was very important to see and to understand. But I'm wondering if you remember the conversation in your home when we were about to say, okay, we're going to do this. We were about to fully commit to preaching and the work that was required to do that. And in that conversation, you and Robin are sitting there in the living room, and Karen and I are sitting on the couch, I think. And Karen said to you, well, if he just preaches the truth, then he should be fine, right? And I don't know if you remember or not, but you almost fell out of your seat.
Yeah.
Because you said, have you read the New Testament?
I do remember that. And let me say, because Karen may hear this at some point, Karen, I love you.
I do that all the time.
But I remember Karen looking at me and saying, well, he can't get in trouble if he just preaches the truth, right? And I thought, poor girl, poor girl.
So naive.
I said, have you read what happened in the New Testament when people preach the truth? Man, that's when you do get into trouble. Truth is that preaching is a full-time, man-sized work. And anybody who thinks otherwise is not familiar with it or hadn't ever tried it. In fact, many of the men that I know who perhaps have not been able to carry through with the work, at least part of the problem is they didn't understand the commitment that was required. First of all, just getting up and speaking in front of folks. Most people don't want to do that, period.
Right.
And so, that's a fear for a lot of folks. And then making the continual need for new material. That's a challenge. How to organize a lesson, how to present a lesson in a way that's going to be effective. There is a lot of work and commitment. But to your credit, Danny, you always had, from the very first time I heard you, you always had a sincerity about you. You cared about, I could tell that you cared about people. You cared about brothers and sisters in Christ. You cared about visitors. You wanted to help people. And that's the main ingredient. You can't give that to somebody. You had that. What you needed to work on was just the nuts and bolts, as you said, kind of the grunt work of preaching. I guess we can say it that way. How to organize it, how to present it. That's very teachable. But the part you already had, you did that on your own through the grace of God, God's providential care. And what you and I did was just hammer out some of the nuts and bolts and the grunt work of preaching. And you took right to it. You never said, no, John, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to try to do that. And so it was a wonderful experience for me.
Me too. It's an amazing time. I think about it all the time because that's, you always look back and think about how did I get here and how did this start? And my dad brings it up frequently as well because he loves you very much. And Karen, I'm bringing that up to you because Karen, she's very fond of that moment as well. So I'm glad you clarified your love for her first because, like I said, we were so clueless. Both of us, I think I was sitting next to her shaking my head like, yeah, what's the problem? And you're like, and Robin, probably shaking her head and thinking, oh boy, they've got a few things to learn.
Poor Robin. She and I have been married going up on 42 years now. And she grew up being an elder's daughter and then a preacher's wife. I want you to think about how many hours she's sat out in the foyer waiting for some business meeting.
That's right. That's right.
And how much she's put up with. And everybody loves Robin. She's easy. People kind of put up with me, but they really love Robin.
I understand that. I really do. It's so nice to have her with us, the wife that everyone loves and enjoys and can speak to because it softens the having to deal with us.
That last congregation I left, they said, well, it's okay if you leave, John, but is there any way Robin can stay? And I said, no, we're a package deal.
How much you been paying Robin? That is hilarious. So, for you, I know you're a prolific writer, and you've recently authored several books, and I just want to give you an opportunity to talk about that because you've written for magazines, Field and Stream, Texas Sportsman, I think you said, and there's other magazines that you've written for through the years. But this freedom you have now is giving you the time and opportunity to put in the work to write and put out workbooks that are Bible-based. So tell us a little bit about that and some of the things that you've enjoyed with that.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed writing, but it's not easy. It doesn't come naturally to me, but I enjoy working at it. And there's always been plenty of evidence that God exists and that the Bible is His Word and that Jesus is His Son. So I don't mean to imply that there's been a lack of evidence, but I would say in the last generation, there has been an explosion of scientific, archaeological, biological, chemical, just information from all fields of science, and then from within the Bible itself to show that we have an overwhelming reason to believe that God does in fact exist and that you can have confidence in His Word, that His Word is something special and that Jesus is his son. And as I had more time to work on that and begin to put that in workbook form and then to teach classes with that, I began to pull resources from different areas. And so, for example, when we would talk about Anthony von Leeuwenhoek, who was the father of microbiology, I made a little Leeuwenhoek microscope and let folks look at cells through the Leeuwenhoek microscope, and it just blows people's minds when they can actually do that. And then to show how Leeuwenhoek believed the Bible, believed in the Creator. First time he saw the little microbes, he said, that has to be the hand of God. Look how perfectly formed that is.
Yeah.
Those great heroes of science, almost all of those early heroes of science had a deep Bible faith. And in fact, because they expected that the universe reflected the mind and wisdom of God, they looked for order and intelligence. And they found the evidence of that. And now to be able to explore that and to kind of put it in workbook form, it's been a real joy for me. I mean, I just love doing that. I can talk about it all day long. I don't know how long this podcast is, but don't get me started, brother.
Yeah, no. Well, I'm going to ask you about another one.
You are getting me started.
Yes, it's too late. I want to ask you about another one that's actually in the workbook, and that's George Washington Carver and the life of George Washington Carver, and that he is a great person to bring up, not just with members of the church in a classroom, but really everyone. This can reach everyone.
Yeah. One of the values of teaching Bible evidences and apologetics is that's a subject that just about everybody has some degree of interest. I mean, when we started the classes at University Oaks, I encouraged our members to invite friends, folks who were skeptics, agnostics, atheists, different religious faiths. I encouraged them to invite them, and I thought, well, this may be a train wreck, but it turned out to be anything except that. We actually did have atheists who came to the Bible classes, and like I said, my thought was, well, this isn't going to work out at all. But you know what I found is that most people, if you treat them respectfully, they're respectful in return. I'm not saying you're not going to be challenged. I certainly had been asked them hard questions, but evidences and apologetics is one of those areas that just about everybody has an interest in. And when you start talking about people like Carver, George Washington Carver, now let me say that people always get Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver mixed up because they share the same name, both black individuals of renown. Booker T. Washington was the head of Tuskegee Institute, later Tuskegee University. He hired George Washington Carver in 1896, if I remember correctly, 1896. And George Washington Carver taught there for 46, close to 47 years. His life ran up into World War II, and he perished in 1943, as I recall. Wow. And Carver, I'm not saying we would agree with everything that he thought or taught, because we certainly wouldn't, but he believed in God. And in fact, he said, my favorite quotation of his, he said, I'm not interested in any science that leaves God out. In fact, I'm not interested in anything that leaves out God, or much of anything that leaves out God.
That's right.
And he thought that by studying nature, you could see a reflection of God's providential care and wisdom. And he was a master teacher, by the way. He believed that people learn best by direct hands-on work and observation. He didn't believe in long, tedious lectures. He had ways of demonstrate. I mean, he was really a master teacher. And I don't know have you ever listened to his speaking voice?
I have not.
All right, so y'all stop the podcast right now and go to YouTube and type in Equipment. That's a poem by Edgar Guest. Equipment, as read by George Washington Carver. It's just 2 minutes long. It's exactly 2 minutes long. And first of all, you're going to be shocked when you hear his voice. It sounds like a young girl. He had tremendous throat problems.
Oh.
And because he had tremendous throat problems, he had a very high-pitched, bird-like voice. You know, and you thought, oh, well, this is terrible. I mean, you wouldn't think that it's a man. But because he was so passionate about his subject, people still loved to listen to him. And, that passion, it was something that people were really attracted to. And so one of the lessons that he taught me is that's what teaching is about.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is, sharing that passion and that connection. And so you can talk about Carver, and I don't care if somebody's an atheist, an agnostic, a denominationalist, you can almost always get their attention when you start talking about his life. He should never have survived infancy. When he was a baby, he and his mother were stolen by slave raiders. He was born on a little farm, homestead, I guess is the right word for it, in Diamond Grove, Missouri, which is just south of what today is Joplin, Missouri. And when he was a baby, he and his mother were stolen by slave raiders. He was real sick. He was always sick, it seems, and his mother was never located. His father was probably, and frankly, we're not sure, but his father was probably a slave on a nearby plantation who perished in a logging accident early on. He had one older brother who died of smallpox. So George Washington Carver, as a baby, because he was considered worthless, was left by the side of the road. And a tracker found him and brought him back to Moses Carver. That's where the George Washington Carver thing comes from. Brought him back to the slave owner. And this is all I could find. I found the baby. That's it. Don't know what happened to the mama. So he should never have survived infancy. And yes, after the Civil War, of course, slaves were free, but there are different degrees of freedom.
Yeah.
And what he wanted more than anything else was an education. On Sundays, he went to the little church at Locust Grove. They'd let him in on Sunday to the church services at Locust Grove, which are right nearby. And so he showed up on Monday to go to school in the same church building. You know, that's where the school was. Well, they didn't let him in. No, we don't let black children into this school. You can come to church here, but you can't come to school here with other white children. But he wanted to go to school. And he found a school, the name of it back then was a School for Colored Children in nearby Neosho, which is 8 miles away. And when George Washington Carver was 12 years old, I want you to get this picture in your mind, a 12-year-old boy who shouldn't have even survived infancy left home and walked to the school, and that's where his education began. Well, I could speak a long time about him, but he believed that God would provide a way if he remained faithful and served him, and he thought he could see the hand of God in the plants, the peanuts, the soybeans, the sweet potatoes. He thought he could see God's hand in that, and he shared that wherever he went. And he's such a gifted teacher. Do you have time for one story? Can I tell you one more story?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing.
House Ways and Means Committee, when George Washington Carver was a pretty well-known scientist by this time, they were discussing a tariff. And you know how it is. They have the Congress, and you have all these speakers coming before the House Ways and Means Committee, and they gave them each 10 minutes to talk, and then they'd argue this way, and they'd argue that way, and all the congressmen get bored out of their minds, and the day was dragging on, and this old black man, here comes George Washington Carver, stoop-shouldered, he only had one suit, he only wore one suit, it was threadbare, he had a couple of old beat-up briefcases, his tie was handmade, he was wearing a handmade tie, and this black man gets up in front of the white congressman, and they go tapping their watch, 10 minutes, man, you got 10 minutes. An hour and a half later, he was still speaking at their insistence.
Oh, wow.
And what he did is he brought all the demonstrations of products he had made with peanuts and so forth, and he'd say things to them like, well, I wish y'all could taste this, but can't you, since you can, I'll do it for you. And he'd taste it. He said, boy, that sure is good. He just had a natural way of doing it. But of course, there's all this race prejudice back then. And one of the congressmen raises his hand and says, well, would you like some watermelon with that, boy?
Oh,
a very racist statement, of course. And George Washington, I'm trying to think how I would react if somebody said that to me. What a terrible, terrible, stereotypical thing to say. But Carver he never reacted to that. He said, well, watermelon's good, but we don't really need it with this particular, let me show you another product. And he just went on with the presentation. And when he finished, an hour and a half later, at their insistence, his reputation on the national stage was made.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And so just a great story.
It really is. Yeah. And it speaks to his personality.
You can speak to unbelievers on that. You can speak to children on that. You can share that with anybody to get a Bible talk going. You really can.
Yeah, that's right. It's powerful. Everyone will recognize that.
Yeah.
Man, what a great life lesson to take and to use for the very points that you're making. And I saw too, when I was looking at One Stone is where a lot of your material is available for the Evidences workbook. Warren Berkeley, another well-known gospel preacher, has already given an excellent review of your book. And he mentions chapter 5 specifically, the ant, the monarch, and the woodpecker, and how they reveal the genius of divine order. So that's one that stuck out in his mind.
Yes, and one of the good things about studying those common everyday creatures is that we're all familiar with them to one degree or another. So we're not talking about double helix DNA and really strange, challenging material. We're talking about things that everybody knows. And to me, if I was just going to pick one of those, since we're here in Austin, Texas, and in the flight path of the monarch butterfly, just think about the monarch butterfly. Think about any butterfly for a moment. Think about their entire life cycle. So you have an adult butterfly, and it lays an egg, and the egg hatches and becomes a caterpillar, and the caterpillar is an eating machine. And in the case of monarch butterflies, they only eat milkweed. They only eat milkweed. And Danny, they never make mistakes. They never make mistakes. The monarchs only lay their eggs on milkweed. The caterpillars only eat the milkweed. And then they change into, we used to call them cocoons, but actually cocoons are for moths. Butterflies turn into a chrysalis. So, so you have the chrysalis, and then you have the adult that hatches from the chrysalis. And think about it, there's nothing about a caterpillar that would cause you to think it's going to become a butterfly.
Not one thing. Nope.
So a caterpillar has simple eyes. Monarch butterflies have a compound eye. Caterpillars get around by walking. Butterflies get around by flying. A butterfly weighs less than the caterpillar that it came from. When caterpillars go into the chrysalis, the caterpillar dissolves into a soup-like mixture. And then through some process that scientists are still trying to figure out, the right tissues form at the right time for this soup-like mixture to become an adult butterfly. And if you stop and think about Darwinian evolution by definition, Darwinian evolution does not have a goal in mind except for the survival of the creature. And so it's not aiming for the caterpillar to become a butterfly.
Right.
So how do you get from an adult butterfly to an egg to a caterpillar to the chrysalis to the adult butterfly unless the entire plan is already there from the beginning?
Right.
You can't do that. The chrysalis is just a casket unless all of the genetic information is there from the very beginning.
Exactly.
Oh, it gets better, brother. So here in the fall of the year in Austin, San Antonio, heading on south, the eastern population of monarchs, they spread out in the summer and the spring across 400,000 square miles, up into the northern United States, even into Canada. And then in the fall of the year, there's one generation of the monarch butterfly that lives much longer than the other generations. Most generations of monarch butterflies only live 3-4 weeks, something like that. The Methuselah generation, that's what it's called, the last generation.
How about that?
The Methuselah generation, there's probably a good Bible story in there somewhere. The Methuselah generation lives up to 8 months. How does it know to do that?
Yeah.
And that allows the monarchs to filter all the way down to the Oyamel fir forest in Mexico. And they go from 400,000 square miles to several sites down in Mexico that may only cover 40 acres, 100 acres, something like that. So, and now here's the really clincher for all of this. The butterfly that goes down into Mexico, not a single one of them, not one, has ever been to Mexico before. Because in the spring of the year, when they go back north, it takes 2 or 3 generations for the butterflies to make it back north. So it's not like they leave Mexico and all fly back up to Canada or something. They actually are several generations going back north, which means that in the fall of the year, when they turn around to go south, not one of those butterflies, it's their grandparents who were down there, or their great-grandparents who were down
amazing.
there. Now, friends, Darwinian evolution has no explanation for that. The first 2 butterflies have to get that right.
Exactly.
There is no explanation for that. So if you didn't know any other creature except the monarch butterfly, you should know there's a creator. Yeah. You would know there's a God, and an honest-hearted person then is going to be searching for that God.
Yep.
You can talk about other creatures, but that's the one that really, sticks in my mind.
That's good. I love it. And I think I'm just thinking about the one who may just say to themselves, currently I'm an atheist. I just don't believe there's a God. And to sit in and say, I'll hear what you have to say. That once you begin that, and as you said, you can just say over and over, wait, there's more.
Right.
If that's not spectacular enough, and like you said, just that linchpin of it all, of them returning, not the ones that left,
right,
but generations later, they come back to those tight 40, 50 acre locations and then begin the process again. And it's all by God's design.
The transvolcanic mountains in Mexico are magnetic in nature. They have a lot of iron ore deposits in them. Monarch butterflies have magnetite, a magnetic deposit in their bodies.
How about that?
How do they get down there? Well, one reason they get down there is because there's a magnetic attraction. Now, how'd that get there?
Exactly.
You'd almost think that somebody designed that, wouldn't you, Danny? I mean, that's crying design.
That's right.
You may not think it's the God of the Bible. You may have you may think aliens came to Earth and did all that, but that didn't happen by accident.
That's right.
And when I've presented that in Bible classes with atheists there, almost all of them have said, well, I got to rethink my, now, I don't mean that they automatically accepted the God of the Bible.
Sure.
But now there's information they didn't have before that they got to think about.
That's right. Yeah. And a lot of them, unfortunately, would remain in an echo chamber and be talking to others who don't believe. And so these things won't be presented. Yeah. So that's fantastic. And I appreciate all that good work that you're doing. One more that I have to touch on, because we are just about out of time, but the one I really wanted to touch on with you was in the appendix. You've got the monkeys and the typewriter theory, and I that's my favorite thing. I think that's hilarious.
Yeah.
So explain to us what that theory is, the monkeys and the typewriter.
Oh yeah, we've probably all heard of this illustration. It's actually, there's a name for it. It's called the infinite monkey theorem. And it usually goes something like this. Usually atheists will say, and I've had this presented to me in Bible class, I should tell you that. But they'll say something like, if you gave an infinite number of monkeys, infinite number of years, an infinite number of typewriters, they would eventually produce the unabridged works of Shakespeare or something like that. Give them enough time and enough chances. Eventually, so in other words, enough time. If time and chance become the twin gods of evolution, enough time, enough chances. Well, the trouble is that somebody actually bothered to run that experiment. And you can go on Wikipedia. I tell people that my knowledge is about Wikipedia deep. But if you go on Wikipedia and type in the infinite monkey theorem, it'll show you where a college class actually, they put some typewriters in with, half a dozen monkeys or something like that. And what do you think actually happened? Did they type half of Shakespeare and then run out of spit? Or, well, what actually happened is they all pounded on the typewriters until they were broken, or they just beat on the letter S and had S, repeated 1,000 times, or they decided the typewriter was a good place to go to the bathroom. But mathematically speaking, it doesn't matter how much time or how many chances you give. To our human mind, it sounds like, oh, yeah, maybe that might work if you give them enough time. No.
Never.
That's right.
And that's why I like it so much, because when I first see the idea introduced, I think maybe.
Yeah.
Infinite. Monkeys, they have fingers, they can do something. But as you said, once the study was done and they say, here's the results, and I think they pointed out that the apparently the main monkey in one room had a rock and was just pounding the letter S
and
1,000
if you think
times.
about it, that's what they would do.
Yes, because they're monkeys. And so, they not only did not produce the works of Shakespeare, they didn't write the name Macbeth, not once, So it's just ridiculous. And yet those are some of the things where someone goes, okay, well, you got me there. I guess it is possible. And no, it's been tested. It's not possible. Not even close. And so I love that, and I think it's very useful to you. And so tell us the name of that workbook again, because it can be found on One Stone.
Yes, The Christian in Creation, The Christian in Creation. So what I did is I've been working on getting 3 workbooks that I think will address 3 areas for us that are necessary. First of all, can we know there's a God? Can we know that the Bible is God's Word? And that's what The Christian in Creation is about, the kind of evidences we've talked about in this podcast. The second workbook about light unto my feet, lamp unto my feet, is about, can we have confidence in our English translations of the Bible? You'll talk to somebody and they'll say, well, the Bible has been corrupted over time and you can't really believe it's the Word of God and man's messed it up. So lamp unto my feet is about whether or not we can have confidence in the English translations of the Bible. And then a workbook that I'm currently working on that I hope will be out in a few weeks is Opening Doors, 21 Ways to Spread the Gospel, which is about how do we share the gospel with others. So we know there's a God. We know we can have confidence in the Bible. Now, what are we going to do with that information?
Yeah,
so that's kind of the goal.
Those are mostly icebreakers, aren't they?
Yeah.
Here's how you start.
That was the goal. That's what we had in mind.
Yeah. Well, I've read all of that material, and it's all very, very good. I know you have developed more and more as time has gone on, so I haven't seen everything that you have, but we want folks to know that those books are out or going to be out, and they're available on One Stone, which is they just release a lot of spiritual material, study workbooks, complete books, all types of things. But John Evans is the name that you want to look up. We appreciate so much having you here today. We as is our tradition, we have Bible trivia.
Oh.
And so John, he understands the rules, that at least to some level here, that I have 2 questions for you. You've got 2 for me. We'll go one at a time.
Oh, okay.
So I'll start.
Yeah.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Because I want you to
It's easy for me to say I don't know.
Oh, man. All right. Kurt doesn't like to say he doesn't know, but and neither do I, by the way. I want to know.
Oh, okay.
But that's why we do this. It's good for us.
Well, it's pretty easy for me to admit my ignorance. I've had a lot of practice.
Trivia, sweet trivia.
All right, the first question for everyone out there and the first question for John is, what is the one commandment that God gave to man but did not allow it to be completed?
The one commandment that God gave to a man?
To man. If you want clarification, to a man, but he did not allow it to be completed.
All right. So well, I guess what's immediately coming to my mind would be the Abraham and Isaac, I guess.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
He commanded Abraham to take his son to a place that he would show him and to sacrifice him.
Yeah.
And Abraham went on his way to do that terrible thing, and the Lord stopped him.
Oh, okay.
So.
Yeah. That's what was in my mind. And but you kind of threw me a little curve. You said man, so I thought maybe it was a more general command.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
Nice. Okay. Well, give us your first question.
All right. So the first sermon I ever heard Danny Simmons preach was on David and Goliath. David and Goliath. How tall was Goliath?
You want to know what the Bible says or what we figured?
Well, you can use the Bible measurement and then translate it into English measurement if you want to.
I'm not sure I can do either. My mind's going
how
blank.
about guess? That's all right, Danny. Because that'll give me permission to miss the second one that you give me.
Yeah, it really does open the door, doesn't it? What is the 6 cubits?
6 cubits. You're
and a
halfway
span.
home. That's it. You nailed it,
Nice.
brother. Now, tell me how much 6 cubits in a span.
Okay, I'm going to tell you what I believe that it is. I think it's 9.5 feet.
Okay, actually, that's very close. The judges will accept that answer. Most scholars say 9 feet 9 inches.
Oh.
Span. So 9 feet 9 inches. You know, if we say a cubit's a foot and a half, that gives us the 9 feet from the 6 cubits. And so it depends on what you think a span is. All
Okay,
right?
yeah.
But most scholars say 9 feet 9 inches. But boy, you're right there in the ballpark. I think that's a mighty fine answer.
Me too. That has to be right. All right. So we're both doing okay so far.
Yeah.
The second question for you and the third question for all of our listeners, who took, this is going to be in the Gospel of John is where it's found, who took the body of Jesus down from the cross and bound it in strips of linen with the spices?
Oh, wow. That's really good. You know, I'm thinking about the women came to bear spices to Jesus. And I remember that Nicodemus was involved in that too. Is there something different that you're looking for there?
Well, I'll give you this because I realize that it could. There's several things where spices are mentioned, as you just pointed out. Let me say to you that 2 men were involved in bringing the body down or taking the body and wrapping it and putting it in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea.
Oh, okay.
Who's the second individual?
Okay, besides, and not Nicodemus. So, boy, you got me, Dan.
It is Nicodemus.
Okay, so there you
Yeah,
go.
did I rule that out for you?
Well, I said Nicodemus earlier,
You
but
did?
I wasn't. Yeah.
Okay. So I said Joseph of Arimathea,
Well,
thinking
you
that's.
said Joseph Arimathea, but I said Nicodemus earlier. Yeah.
Oh, well, I gave you the other half of the answer because it is Joseph of Arimathea.
Yeah.
Other gospel
Which
writers.
is interesting
point that
about
out.
Nick. You know, I wonder about Nicodemus. I study that. I study what Jesus said to Nicodemus, and I like to think that indicates that even though, you know, he had some reservations and so forth, that he came around in his thinking. You know, I'd like to think that.
Me too. Because if he touches a dead body on the Sabbath for the Passover, he's defiled.
Right.
And so he took a pretty brave step, and
yeah.
I sure do like to think that myself.
Yeah, this is all
But,
good.
yeah, you did great. I'm sorry. I had already given to you Joseph of Arimathea because that's usually the first person everyone names.
Yeah.
But Nicodemus is mentioned only in John.
Yeah.
And he came with
That's right.
100 pounds
Yeah.
of the spices. So he provided
Yeah.
the things necessary. John
Have
says,
you
which
ever
is,
smelled any of those spices? by
I
the way?
haven't.
They're
Have
very,
you?
you know, we like kind of light perfumey kind of perfumes, that kind of thing. These are more like essential oils, which if you think about death and so forth, I guess it makes more sense. But these have a much stronger fragrance than what we might be imagining.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense because, as you said, we're trying to cover the stench that eventually will set in. And so that's it's interesting. John mentions to us it's the custom of the Jews to bury it in that way. And so the beautiful thing about all of that is that he will raise in 3 days and ascend to his Father, and the work of the church will begin. And so we're blessed to be a part of that. And we sure hope that everyone out there is blessed to be a part of that as well. Thank you again, John, for being here today. We love having
I
you.
get to do a second one on you, right?
You have another question?
Didn't you say 2?
Yes, I did. And I was trying to catch up.
Oh, some things never change. All right, so you ready for the second one?
I guess.
Okay, here you go, Danny. On what day of creation were dinosaurs made?
Oh, man. The Bible doesn't say.
Oh, yeah, it does.
Oh, man. The word dinosaur?
No, it doesn't. Well, the word dinosaur wasn't around until the 19th century, so we're not going to.
Yeah. That's not
but
fair.
But you can know. Let me say it that way. It's a better way to say it. You can know, if you know the definition of dinosaur, you can know what day of creation they were made.
Man.
That's a good question, isn't
it? It is a great question. I'm going to lay that on Kurt. I know what 2 days it could be.
All right.
And because I just don't have the order. 5th and 6th. It's one of those.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me make a decision here. The battle inside of me was man created independently on a separate day, because I don't think
that's a good battle.
Yeah, I don't think that he was. I'm not sure why I think that. Let's say the 5th day that dinosaurs were created.
It's so close,
man.
Okay, so as land-dwelling creatures,
yes,
and so the actual official definition of a dinosaur would be land-dwelling creatures, would have been the 6th day, which means that they would have been created on the same day as man.
Yeah.
Now that's kind of an interesting thought. Isn't it?
It absolutely is, because the Lord's going to allow these creatures and beasts to pass before Adam. He names them.
That's right.
And so I'm just trying to give him time through the afternoon.
Modern day science would say, no, they're separated by millions of years. According to the Bible, they're made on the same day.
Right. That's right. And we believe what the Bible has revealed to us. Yeah. That is awesome. Well, thank you again. I'm sorry I tried to cut you short on the final question, and I'm glad that you had it with you.
You're a good friend.
Ready to drop it. So are you, brother. Thank you for being here with us, and we look forward to the worship service tomorrow. It's going to be fantastic to be with you once again. Just very excited about that. For all of you who are with us today, thank you so much for listening. We hope that you've enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to look up John and all the different videos and the audio, George Washington Carver, and certainly the books that you have put so much time and effort into to write. We know that they will serve you well if you commit your heart to those things and use those to not only strengthen your own faith, but to help those around you. Be a blessing to those around you. Love and serve God with all of your heart, and may God be with you until we meet again.